Welcome back to another episode of the Brett Snodgrass Podcast. So excited for you guys to join me today. Got a great friend of mine, Greg Orman, on the podcast with me. He's from South Florida, married, 3 kids, entrepreneur, businessman. You guys are going to want to love him. He is a man of adventure. He's dropping so many nuggets on this podcast. It is crazy about marriage. Before I introduce you to Greg Orman, though, I want you guys to go over to our new website at irondeep.com. We got a new retreat coming up, guys. Our very first Iron Deep Men's Awakening is coming up September the 25th of 2022, and I think we got maybe 4 spots left. So you guys are not going to want to miss this Men's Awakening event. It is for entrepreneurs and business owners that are male, that are seeking after more of what you say, not necessarily more money, but more significance in life, more deeper intimacy with God, more relationships with other guys. So you guys want to check that at irondeep.com. Go to that now. Also, check out our new YouTube channel at Iron Deep. So again, Iron Deep YouTube channel, check that out. We're going to put all the show notes in the description down there on our YouTube channel. Now, I want to introduce you to Greg Orman. So who is Greg Orman? He is from South Florida, like I said. He is a family man, an intentional husband to his amazing wife, Julie. He's an intentional father, and he intentionally has a lot of fun, and you guys are going to want to see that today. He believes our potential is our greatest gift and lives to help mine that potential from himself and others around him. His website is marriedforapurpose.com, and Greg and his wife Julie are extremely passionate about helping married couples thrive. He takes a unique, different approach. You guys are not going to want to miss this. I actually talked to him after the show about signing up my wife and I for his program, the Reboot Process. So now, here he is, guys. I want to introduce you to Mr. Greg Orman. What's going on, Greg?
How's it going, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Super excited to have you on the show today. We're going to be talking about marriage, and not only just marriage, but marriage, how to be married for a purpose, and super excited about that because you run an organization, Married for a Purpose, right, Greg?
That's exactly right. It's exciting to be here, dude.
Yeah, man. Before we just get talking in about the nuts and bolts of marriage and why there's such a problem with marriages out there, and a lot of people are just in this lukewarm type of mediocre marriage. Some of them are hanging by a thread in their married life. But let's just start with this question, man. So who is Greg Orman?
Who am I? Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I am a father of 3. I have a 28-year-old daughter, a 22-year-old daughter, and a soon-to-be 21-year-old son. And we live in South Florida, my wife and I, and I am also the husband to Julie Gorman. I love being near the beach here in South Florida. We live about a mile off of the beach. And so anything having to do with water, you've got my attention. I'm all in, love fishing. I love hunting, and have a passion for marriage, which is something that I didn't expect, honestly, kind of fell into it. And feel like at this point it's a calling, and it's just some place in my life that has borne a lot of fruit, both for my family, but also, for others. Outside of that, man, I'm kind of an oxymoron, they say. I've been called a surfer hick dude. So you'll pick up by my language that, sometimes it just doesn't compute. It's like, is this guy a surfer or is he a hillbilly? The answer is yes.
Yes, the answer is yes, both. So what's been the best waves you surfed at? Location?
I would say Australia. Australia was really nice. We have waves here on the southeast coast of Florida, but there's only a couple of places where they break really, really well. But man, at Bondi Beach in Australia, they roll in pretty smooth.
That's a bucket list Australia for me. So gonna get down there sometime. So awesome, man. So again, we're gonna be talking about marriage, and you said you kind of fell into this. Right? This isn't something when you were 20, 21 years old, you're like, I'm going to be a marriage coach, consultant. Me and my wife, we're going to help marriages. And so talk to us about how did you fall into this? What happened to you to get so passionate about marriage?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks for asking that. Julie and I have been married 23 years now, and we were both married and divorced before. We brought a lot of baggage into our marriage. Our spouses, both of them, were unfaithful, and so biblical grounds for divorce.
Mm.
Both of us tried really, really hard to make our previous marriages work, but nonetheless, eventually we had to throw in the towel. And so when we came together, baggage from our previous marriage, plus just our upbringing and all the different things that we all encounter in life, everybody's got a story, but we brought ours right into the marriage. And so the short version is, dude, we almost didn't make it. I mean, we loved each other passionately, but we fought just as passionately. Mm. And I can remember, in fact, a little over 2 years into our marriage, when Julie and I both realized we went a whole day and didn't fight. And when I say fight, I mean fight. Sometimes it was legit, man. And so as God would have it, really, both of us are fairly growth minded and want to improve both as human beings and as leaders and, and things of that nature. And as we continued to go on our own growth journey, we began to change. And there were a couple of turning points in our marriage where I think we just realized that the health of our marriage was not up to the other person changing. It was up to me changing. And for her, it was up to her changing. And so I believe that is a fundamental, this one's for free because you didn't ask, but I believe that that's a great fundamental for anyone who is in a relationship. It does take two, obviously. But the only way to grow is to grow yourself and to focus on what it is that you might need to do in order to improve the relationship. So anyway, as we continued to grow as people, our marriage got healed, and we had actually begun teaching a young marriage class 2 years into our marriage. And it's funny because, Brett, had been called by our pastor to do this. And of course, remember, it's hair, teeth, and eyeballs at our house, man. Like, it's not pretty,
And you guys still said yes.
We did.
Like you guys said yes. We're going to teach this.
Yeah. So it was funny because we sat down and I'm a very authentic, very transparent person, which sees what you get. And so I shared with Julie, I said, look, I'm willing to do this and I'm excited about doing it. I said, but I'm not going to go in with the church face on. If we're going to do this, we're going to go in and we're going to be straight. Like, hey, y'all, we fought on the way to church today. And so we did. We were just very transparent and authentic with the people. And I feel like what happened is, through that approach, which is signature to everything we do, that people felt comfortable. They felt like that they weren't the aliens in the room that were dealing with something that nobody else could relate to. In fact, the very people that were leading the class had their own stuff that they were trying to work through,
Yeah.
And so I believe that it made us relatable, and it created an environment where people didn't feel like they were going to be judged. And so that thing just took off like crazy. It was just so blessed. And then over the course of time, we just continued to find ourselves serving in marriage ministries. So we ended up writing a book or two, and we had always worked together. And I'm trying to draw this kind of to a point for you, but about 15 years ago or so, 10 to 15, I really felt like I had a tug at my heart, like that Julie and I really needed to be working together again. And so I tried to pull her in. I was doing a lot of corporate speaking and executive coaching at the time. I was also running a couple of other businesses of ours, but I wanted to do something with her again. And so I tried to drag her into my world, which didn't work at all. She's got a lot of competencies, for business and such, but it just wasn't her jam. She just wasn't having it. And so as I continued to process and pray, I realized, that if I'm to look at our life and see where there is a unification, a cross-pollination of the fruit, it is in marriage. And so we began to kind of toy around with some of the things that we had learned over the years that had taken our marriage to the next level, and things that we'd shared with other people. And we really found a passion. I thought that my passion would be in business, and I still do have a passion for business, Brett, but it was really interesting how I think God just refined my heart. And I think because it's such a great need, like you mentioned before, and we have such a different approach, and there's been such great healing and such, it's very gratifying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
work with people and see their, not just their marriage, but their life change,
Yeah.
And so we developed a passion for it.
That's awesome. I think really what you said about you came into that class, took off the mask. Number one, you were vulnerable, real, and raw. I think that speaks volumes because a lot of times, yeah, we feel like we can't relate to the expert, the teacher, but if the people can relate to you, and I think that's awesome. That's a great foundation. Number one, I think it's why you guys are so successful at what you do. And let's just talk about let's just get into the problems a little bit. I know there's a lot of common problems with married couples, and I went through premarital counseling, and they talked about here's the top 3 or 4 problems that you're going to face. And no one walks down the aisle and gets married thinking that this is going to be a mediocre marriage. We're really going to struggle. I hope that we don't thrive, that our marriage is just okay. No one says that. We all want to have a great marriage. We want to thrive. We want to be in love with each other and do things together and have a purpose. But it seems like that's not the case. Many times when I was talking to you about it, we're doing some men's things, and one of the biggest problems in these men's lives is marriage. They got this great business. They're doing some great things. But when I ask them about their marriage, it's like, it's all right. Right? So like, I'm going to ask you, why is that? What are some of the problems that you're seeing with these marriages? What are some commonality?
Well, let me take a half step back and then step back into that, if that's okay, Brett. And again, I appreciate the question. So first of all, for any of your viewers or listeners, let me just say this. If you really think about it and you think about it logically, there are few things that are more worthy of your time and your and application of yourself than your marriage. And the reason is because if you've ever been an employer, as an example, then you know how marriage problems affects productivity of an employee, right? I know countless executives and worker bees, from all ends of the spectrum, police officers, military, and when you begin to have problems at home, it affects every area of your life. And so statistically, happily thriving marriages literally make more money. They're healthier physically, and of course, they're just generally happier. And so something that touches so many different areas of our life, it's worth making the investment to do a little maintenance on it every now and then. Sure. And so the problems, if you will, that we run into most commonly, I think, the first one I say, everybody's going to like, yeah, no kidding. It's communication. I mean, really. And what we found, Brett, is that people know that it's an issue, but they're not sure exactly what to do about it. And so I'm for this at the risk of sounding a little bit anecdotal, I want to offer just a thought on that, if I may.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have found that is so incredibly breakthrough is when a husband and wife can begin to learn to communicate properly by, one, slowing everything down in their communication. What I mean is when we begin to get irritated, then the conversations tends to speed up and we start replying really fast, and it gets really emotional. And as soon as that happens, there's 2 little glands that sit on top of our kidneys called adrenals. And once those babies kick in, then we have the flight or fight that sets in. And what that simply means is that our blood literally drains out of our brain and into our extremities, which means we're not thinking straight any longer. So when we start slowing things down a little bit, that helps us to get a hold of our emotions a little bit. The second piece of it is to listen for understanding, not for reply. And I think that this is something that, generally speaking, we as Americans suck at. Can I say suck?
You can say
I
whatever
think
you want.
I think we suck at it, man.
Yeah, for
Probably
sure.
elsewhere in the world too, but I think we are in such a microwave, fast-paced society, that we are constantly, like, we listen about the first three words and then we're thinking about what we're going to say in response.
Yeah.
And it's a recipe for disaster. And I've learned with Julie and with many other relationships that if I will just slow down and listen for understanding, and what that looks like is, one, pausing and not thinking about what I'm going to say, but really trying to listen. Do I understand what she's saying? And then asking a question to ask for clarity, to make sure that I understand what her point is, or maybe ask a question to find out more,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that I can better understand. I may not agree, but if I can understand, then it's going to at least help me to have more of an intelligent response,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Love that. So communication, yeah, slowing down, listening for understanding. Anything else with that?
Well, not with that, but you mentioned just problems in general. And so, because that one's so common, I wanted to throw that one out there. But let me give you another broad stroke too, because of the way that you asked the question. One of the things that Julie and I learned is that all thought leaders throughout time they've disagreed on a lot of different things, but they've all unanimously, no matter what era of time they come from, and no matter if they're Baptist or Buddhist or anywhere between, there's one central thing that they've all agreed on unanimously, and that is that we become what we think about.
Mm.
And if that's true, then it's really important that we think about what it is we're thinking about. Now, I'm not trying to play Dr. Seuss here. Like, I mean that. Let that set on you just a second, like, think about what it is that you're allowing to occupy your brain space. And as it applies to the marriage relationship, many times the couples begin to hit some speed bumps. And if they get up enough courage, and that's a big if, but if they get up enough courage to reach out to someone to get some help, all too often the person on the other side of the table wants to immediately dive into the problems and the issues. Let's talk about the problems, talk about the issues. Let's see if we can fix the problems, solve the problems, and so on and so forth. Well, if that's true, I mean, if that's the normal approach, and if what we know that all the thought leaders have agreed upon, and King Solomon said it as, we think in our hearts, so we become, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that's true, then if we spend our time trying to diagnose, fix, and solve problems, even though our intent really is noble, the subject matter is still what? It's problem, right? And that's a negative pull at our spirit. What we learned is that there's a better question. We're not saying that you need to ignore problems. Problems exist. When David went to fight the Goliath, he didn't say, "Oh, there ain't no Goliath. There's no giant over there mouthing off." You know what I mean? But he came with a different approach. And so what we do is we encourage couples to build on common ground by asking, what's the desired outcome? So fair enough, we got all these problems, we got these issues. But rather than focusing and giving energy, because here's another truth statement: what you feed grows and what you starve dies. So if we keep feeding the problems, then what happens is we just become problem aware. And every time we solve one, there's another one knocking on the door waiting to be solved, right? We're feeding it.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we begin to ask different questions again, okay, what is the desired outcome? What do we both agree that we want? We may need to take that on a really high level at first, but once we find where we can agree, then we can begin to pull it down to some of the more specifics and begin to build a vision together on how it is that we get to what it is that we both agree is the desired outcome. Now, all of our energy and all of our focus is moving forward to where we want to be, instead of focusing on what we didn't want that was causing the issues to begin with. Does that make sense?
No, it really does. And I love your approach. And before the show, you said you guys use a different type of approach. You use a unique approach. And I'm already bought in because even on your website, I was reading through it and it talked about you don't have a problem-focused marriage. You want a purpose-focused marriage. And you focus on the purpose. Where do you want to go? And it's funny, even when I asked that question, my expectation was to think about, the 5 big problems is finances, sex, in-laws, right? And just go down the list. But yeah, I love this approach. And so you're really focused on this purpose focused marriage. So I want to just dive into some practical application. And I know this is a lot and it's heavy and this takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But just talk to our audience a little bit about some practical application of someone says, hey, I want a purpose-focused marriage. I want that. What's like a first couple of steps that they can do with that?
Well, that's a great question. I think first we always have to start with, again, I'm going to say communication, and simultaneously with that communication in trying to understand, because here's what happens, Brett. We when we're dating, we put our best foot forward. We're on our best behavior, and we're very gracious. In other words, there's not much about, the person that we're dating that, we're going to take issue with. And if so, we may not date them for very long. Is that fair to say?
For sure.
So we're putting our best foot forward. And then once we get married, I think the dynamic begins to immediately change. And this, I think, is an important thing to recognize, because what happens is we get comfortable. And when we get comfortable, we're no longer putting our best foot forward. Mm-hmm. We get complacent. So those are two C's that kind of come along with one another. The more comfortable we are, the more complacent we get. You'll find this in your marriage. You'll find it in your business, your finances, and so on and so forth as well. And that complacency is where things begin to erode, right? And if we can recognize it as such, then we can begin to kind of rewind and go, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to be able to see my spouse, get this, as a person, instead of your spouse, like as a person who has good days, who has bad days, who never intended to just whiz in your Wheaties and ruin yours. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like they just got stuff going on. Yeah. And when I look at Julie as a human being and I actually see her as a person, I realize that there are times, and there have been seasons in my marriage where I've treated total strangers with more grace than what I've treated her. I certainly treated coworkers and bosses and so on and so forth, because I don't have to air out every single grievance that I have with my boss. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be working somewhere, if I did that. And I don't expect my employees to do that with me either, right? Mm-hmm. But yet, for some reason, I've had seasons in my life where I felt like I needed to do that with Julie. And so again, it comes back to that thought circle, right? Okay, what am I allowing to preoccupy my mind? So I think that that's, again, just some good things, because then we can begin to think about, okay, what do I need to do to begin to see my spouse as a person and begin to date them? How can I freshen this thing up? I think the other thing is to look at what your list of expectations are. One of the books that we wrote, one of the chapters in it is Expectations That Cause Confrontations. And it's interesting because I think we all, if we're honest, come into marriage with a certain set of expectations. If we've had good premarital coaching, counseling, whatever, then they've helped us uncover some of those things that we need to talk about that maybe we didn't know we needed to talk about. But I can tell you, one of the most comical conversations Julie and I ever had was the difference in our upbringings. And then as a result of that, kind of what the list of expectations were. And we kind of cracked up at one, and it's like, no wonder we had sparks, not good ones, but, we had good ones too. But we just kind of begin to break down and be honest about what those expectations were, and then sort of level set and communicate on what our expectations were going to be moving forward. And it was a very productive conversation. It took us a minute to get there, but it was a very productive conversation. So
I love that. Would you on the expectations conversation, would you recommend just kind of, again, forcing yourself and forcing your mind to try to lower some of your expectations? For example, I just came back from a camping trip with my daughter. We did a dad-daughter camping type of trip. And one of the advice that I got was come into this and really lower your expectations, because my expectations are really high going into something like that. Oh, we're going to have this amazing time. We're going to have the best connection we've ever had. We're going to have some emotions going on. It's going to be awesome. But if it doesn't happen, then I'm like, oh, I feel let down. Same thing with marriage, do you think? Just to kind of lower some of those expectations and then you're surprised?
I think that could be a good strategy, honestly. I think everything is relative. There are some expectations that are, you know what I mean? Like you need to have those expectations, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing that shifted for me several years ago, Brett, that dovetails with what you're talking about there is when, just as an example, I noticed that when I came home from work, I kind of had some expectations, right?
Yeah.
And
Dinner's on the table, everything's organized, you're ready to be served, even had a long day, and then she does too, I'm sure.
that, that's the thing, And so I literally, there was a place on my drive that when I went past this, I began to switch my hat. And I started to think about, okay, I need to put my dad hat on and I need to put my spouse hat on, my husband hat.
Mm.
And I don't know what's been going on in their day, but what I do know is that I'm tired and I do hope to be served, but I need to walk in without those expectations and I need to expect to serve instead of being served.
Yeah.
And it's a tall order, fair enough, but there were times I would literally sit in my driveway for a few minutes before I went in so that I could mentally prepare. And I think that intentionality goes such a long way in all of these things that we're talking about. When we set the intention, like what kind of an evening do I want to have? When you walk in a room, Brett, when any one of us walk in a room, we bring an energy with us.
Yeah.
Automatically, the temp either goes up or it goes down, or it gets lighter or it gets darker. It's like, oh God, he's home. What I mean? Or, Daddy,
Right.
or hey, baby, And so I think for me, just with that very black and white kind of understanding, I would sit in my driveway and decide which one of those guys I wanted to be.
Mm.
And then I didn't go in until I was ready to be the man that I was designed to be for my husband.
Yeah.
To pull out the best in her, to pull out the best in my kids. And there were some days that was a lot harder than others. But I can tell you that as I began to personally take accountability for that change, Julie began to take accountability for that change in her as well. And so it began to reciprocate. Doesn't always happen immediately, but in time it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I really love that. Sometimes as a businessman, we're trying to cram everything in on the way home. And I've realized sometimes I'm on the phone, I get in the driveway and I'm talking to someone and my mind is in this conversation. So when I get out, I'm way back here. My kid's jumping on me and they're like, "Hey, Dad." And I'm like, and it's just, I'm not prepared to be home. So what I've done is, that last 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm not on the phone. I'm preparing myself to enter into the home life. So love that. You talked about dating your wife and putting your best foot forward, and totally agree. Our dating relationship was awesome. We dated for about 13 months before we got married. Now I'm getting ready to celebrate 10 years this year with my wife.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, it's been amazing. But I get it. I'm the same way. I've gotten comfortable, a little bit complacent here and there. I've done things now that I wouldn't have done when we were dating. Treat her away, maybe not attentive to her. And because when we were dating, I was all in. Like when we were together, I was present, all about. I want to get to know you. I want to know you more and deeper. But sometimes now I'm just distracted. So with that, do you prepare yourself, your mind? Do you coach your clients to try to date, to put your best foot forward, to dress up a little bit, to smell a little bit better, take a shower? I don't know. Are these some of the things that you're talking about putting your best foot forward and trying to date your spouse?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. There's two sides to this coin in reality, right? I mean, it's our home, it is our spouse, it is our family. And if there's one place that we should be and have permission to not be at our best, it's hopefully would be at our home. Mm-hmm. But it's when we oversteer that, and again, we get into that lane, that ditch of complacency where it really becomes a problem, And so I think that there is even yet, another piece to this. One, remember, there's only one way to build anything. Only one way we can build anything, and that's by building on common ground. Politicians around the world, for that matter, not just here in the United States, have shown us exactly what happens when we major on our differences. We divide and we become more and more divided over our differences. But we've trained leadership with Dr. John Maxwell all over the world with presidents' cabinets, military bases, mom and pop shops, hospitals, you name it. And between that and just our own leadership journey, one thing that we learned is that doesn't matter if it's a government or a family, when you can give people a common cause, a common vision, a common purpose that they share, then they'll drop their differences and forget that they had any to begin with and rally around the cause. And so I think that the more that we can focus on building common ground, fight for unity above all, and then formulate a vision of where we want to go, where we want to be, let's say 2 to 5 years from now. If you could begin to think, and I honestly like to separate couples for this. We do this during our reboot process, and we literally separate the spouses. Sometimes these are people that have been at each other's throat, like really getting ready to divorce. And this is the last ditch ever to try to make it work. When we get to this place and we separate them and say, write out your vision for each one of these domains, and then we pull them back together, it's always really interesting how people who come in saying, we just don't have anything in common, we're on the same page with anything, how it is like a magic pill, dude. It's like, wow, we actually want a lot of the same things. And so when we begin to capitalize on that and synthesize a common vision for their future, then it's not just disciplines of doing the right thing anymore, which sometimes feels very disempowering and demotivating and overwhelming for that matter.
Yeah.
Hey, here's what we need. Here's where we want to go. Here's where we want to be. What's my part to align our lives with this? And what do we need to do together in order to align our lives with this? And now it's not just a vision, but it's an inspired vision, which means we don't have just discipline, but we've got inspired discipline, and it's inspired by the vision, which helps keeps us on track.
I love that. Oh man, this is really, really good. You guys you got to tune in to Greg Gorman and check out the website, marriedforapurpose.com. Greg, I want to just talk about coaching and consulting. And I'm going to raise my hand where I've never really had a marriage coach, honestly. We've been married 10 years, haven't really had that. We've been to counselors and sat in that room a few times, not a lot. I'm a big visionary, so run a business, doing this men's community called irondeep.com, vision for all that. I'm a big visionary. My wife doesn't really like to talk about vision. Very content person, wants to, pour into the kids, be at home, and that's great. So like we haven't had it. So honestly, to be quite honest, I kind of get what you're saying, or I want to go here, and I feel like sometimes I'm dragging her, like, come on, let's go, and
All felt that way sometimes,
yeah.
Right?
So I guess my question is, I think that coaching would help me possibly, but does everyone need a marriage coach, a marriage consultant, someone to really help them with this process, whether they're good, okay, or on the verge of divorce?
I really think so. And I think that it's probably seasonal. There's some seasons of life where, we have some couples that come to us, Brett, that, they're doing fine, but they just feel like there's more and they don't know exactly what that more is. And they might be like your wife, as an example, they're not good at visualizing and such. And so a good coach is trained to ask the right questions to be able to get down in there and help pull that stuff out of you. If there's one thing you could change about your life right now, one thing about your marriage or your life, what would that one thing be? If your life was better a year from now than it is today, what's changed? And there might be a whole series of questions like that, just to kind of get you thinking in different ways than what you might be if you just were in your own cage of your own brain.
Yeah.
So I do think that it is very necessary in different seasons of life, because sometimes life throws us curveballs too,
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Awesome. Well, we're about out of time, Greg. Thanks for being on the show. But any last tip to our audience out there about wherever they're at in marriage, whether it's on fire, good, great, lukewarm, just any tips to our audience?
Yeah, I think it, there's a passage in the Bible that tells us basically not to be conformed to the world, but to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. And that means, to me, it means by communing with God and really understanding, like, what's he want for my life. And I think that if I could just encourage anybody to maybe slow down and ask God, what does he have to say about you? What does he have to say about your relationship? And then just get quiet. Again, we're not great at that as Americans, generally speaking. We want to go with our list of needs and things of that nature. But I think just allowing God to speak over us, he always speaks in love. It's never like, Greg, well, I remember the other day, you know what I mean? It's just not like that, And the reason that I say this is because I think it helps us secure our own identity, because anything that we say about ourselves, we believe about ourselves, or that anybody else says about us that isn't aligned with who he says we are, or what he says about our situation, or who he says our spouse is out of alignment with him. Which means it's in alignment with the enemy of our soul, if you want to know the truth about it. And so I know that's a little bit deep and fundamental in a sense at the same time, but I believe that if we can slow down long enough to get in touch with that it will give us a lot of the roadmap then to begin to respond differently to ourselves and to our spouse.
I love that. I think one of the common words that I keep hearing you say over and over and over again, whether it's communication or whatever it is just slowing down, reflecting, examining yourself, and kind of focusing on what are you thinking about, how can you help yourself grow in this area. I think that's a great first step for us all to do.
Absolutely. And if anybody has, I'd love to recommend tons of our resources and such. And you've mentioned the website, but I will tell you another book on that note that we read recently that was to this point, and that is the book Essentialism by Greg McGowan. And if any of your viewers or listeners have not read that, I highly encourage, don't make any prejudgments about what it is by the cover or the title. Just get in and crack it, and about 3 pages in, you go, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
That's more.
Love it. I'm going to write that down. We're going to put that in our show notes too on our YouTube channel on the Brett Snodgrass Podcast. So awesome. Thanks, Greg. It's been awesome, man. Thanks for being on the show today. Appreciate you, buddy.
Such a great honor, man. Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.